My issue is that when I study the universe, I don't see any necessity of a God or a personal God at that as well. And so, like the example you showed, like life doesn't come from non-life.
Right.
I don't think we totally have all the answers there yet, because there have been recent scientific studies, like I just watched a TED talk about it 2 years ago, about these scientists in a lab. They put some chemicals together that were probably around when the Earth was in its young state, and had this kind of primordial ooze, and they noticed that certain collections of these molecules would actually like feed off of energy and have very lifelike characteristics. Like in one set they would like vibrate and like dance around and move around each other. Another one would actually seek out other little energy balls and like collect it and get bigger. And sometimes they would like form together and create a hybrid one that would replicate and dance around and do everything and have properties of all the other ones. So that's just an example of how I don't necessarily think we have all the answers as to like, you can't just like say, oh, we don't know it right now, so it must have been God or something. So I'm just, and you usually have like those 5 points you always go to, like rationalism come from irrational, morality and all that kind of stuff. So if you could just like help me find something in the universe that necessitates a God, that'd be great.
I am totally open to scientists taking matter, putting matter together in such a way that life is formed. It's exactly what I believe. An intelligent mind created matter, put it together in such a way that life was formed. So I have no problem with scientists in a lab creating life. But I would love to see a scientist with nothing, nothing, make something. So you have nothing, and suddenly you have something. I'm convinced that takes a creator. That takes some type of supernatural being to bring something out of nothing. And I am convinced also that it takes an intelligent mind to put matter together and energy together in such a way that you got life. The idea that that just happens by chance, there's no evidence to support that.
I mean, there is evidence. You can take just a certain amount of chemicals that would just happen to be laying around, and if they're collected together in such a way, and the universe is a huge superset, so like there's a bunch of possibilities that could happen. Like you can see that these things take on lifelike characteristics. So yeah, I would say it is possible. Maybe unlikely, but it is possible.
Yep. And it's possible that I could wake up in the morning with $1 million in my right pocket.
You could.
I could. But if I base my life on that, I would argue I'm being very stupid.
You would, but at the same time, you're not taking into account how massive the universe is. Like when you study probability, if you say that the works of if you do random letters, the works of Shakespeare is going to come up in the first 1,000 letters, you're kind of a fool. But one of the things about probability you understand is, given enough time, every works of Shakespeare will come up in the exact order that it was written.
Good, okay.
And the universe, I believe, is huge enough, massive on a scale that it's hard to even like imagine that certain chemicals could just happen to come together and bring about lifelike properties.
But if you believe in the Big Bang, you know that the universe doesn't have eternity to produce life. You know that the universe came about 15 billion years ago. So you've got a limited amount of time, 15 billion years, for life to come about by chance. Now, if you and I and someone else are playing poker, and I'm dealing, and 10 times in a row, I deal a perfect hand to myself, if you begin to say, Cliff, I think you're cheating, that's impossible for you to deal 10 hands, all perfect for yourself. And if I say to you, there are multiple numbers of universes, and we just happen to live in the universe where I can deal 10 perfect hands of poker for myself, I think you'll, if you're a Texan, be reaching for your 6-shooter to blow me away for taking all your money away from you. I don't think you're going to say, oh yeah, right, there are a multiple number of universes, there's an infinite amount of time, so I buy the line that you can deal 10 perfect hands of poker cards to yourself in a row. I think you know that that is highly implausible, and what is far more plausible is I'm cheating you out of your money.
No, and I agree. it is possible that you dealt yourself 10 perfect hands. I would never say that, oh, you dealt yourself 10 perfect hands. You were cheating, definitely, without a doubt. I would have some kind of investigation. I would probably check your sleeves and stuff like that and gather some more evidence. I'm not just going to, like, blindly accuse you. That would be unfair.
All right. Let's say I dealt 50 perfect hands of
Once
cards.
again, possible.
Really? How about 100?
Possible.
How about 200?
Possible.
Okay. I don't think you can live your life that way.
I try to.
You can't.
I try.
Prove to me that this fine university is going to give you a diploma on your day of graduation. Prove to me that on your day of graduation, this fine university is not going to say, hey, we're going to break tradition. No diplomas this year. Can you prove that?
I can't prove it. I have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do, though.
Good. You see, sir, you don't base your life on proof. You base your life on evidence.
I agree.
And you cannot get irrevocable, watertight proof. As a thinking human being, you base your life on evidence. That's what I do. I think that's what the majority of us do who treasure our minds. We're not so naive to think I can prove something. Rather, we look for evidence, and then we ask ourselves, what is most plausible? What is most reasonable in light of the evidence? I can't prove God exists. I can't even prove I exist. Maybe I'm just a bad dream you're having. It is possible. But the overwhelming evidence is I do exist, and the overwhelming evidence is, in a different way, God exists. Not the proof, but the evidence.
Okay, so what is the evidence for God?
The evidence for God is design demands a designer. 100 times out of 100, in my experience of life, a delicious meal points to a chef. A shirt points to a tailor. Mount Rushmore does not point to water dripping down over rocks and carving out George and Teddy and Thomas's face. 100 times out of 100, the BMW points to a mechanic. The building points to an architect and a builder. Never in my observation do you get order and design by chance. It demands a designer. Second piece of evidence. The fact that if oxygen comprised 25% of this atmosphere, fires would erupt all over the place. If it comprised 15%, we'd all suffocate. The fact that it comprises 21%, which is exactly what allows us to sustain life, demands some type of intelligent mind. That type of precision, that we have a life-sustaining planet instead of a life-defeating planet, demands some type of intelligent mind. Thirdly, the amount of densely packed information in a single cell, the DNA of a single cell, demands some type of intelligent mind for me. If you and I are walking up and down the beach and we come to ripples in the sand, and you say, hey Cliff, how'd those ripples get there? And I say, obviously because of the waves. That's cool. We keep walking down, we see in the sand, John loves Mary. You say, hey Cliff, how'd that get there? And I say, obviously the waves. Why is that ridiculous? Because densely packed information in the message, John loves Mary, cannot come about as a result of the waves washing over the sand. It demands an intelligent mind. So there's more information in the DNA of a single cell than there's information in 3 sets of the 30-volume Encyclopedia Britannica. It points me to some type of intelligent mind. So those are 3 pieces of evidence that point to God. I could keep going, but why don't you speak now?
Okay, first I want to go ahead and about the one about the Earth being like a perfect place to like habit life. We've found hundreds of planets in our galaxy, in the tiny little space of our galaxy, that have the same same type of atmosphere, same size planet, all that kind of stuff. We've found planets that have the same kind of properties that Earth has, Earth-like planets. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not that out of the ordinary for Earth to just pop up out of nowhere. Do you want to refute that, or?
Well, yeah, first of all, I'd love to find out about where these other planets are that are life-sustaining like Earth is. I'm just curious.
I'm not saying they're sustaining life, I'm saying they're life-like, or they're Earth-like. Like you're saying, like, you know, there's 21% oxygen, a bunch of nitrogen, all that kind of stuff. We found planets that have that same kind of makeup.
But isn't it true that I would never want you to take your spacesuit off if you're on that planet?
I mean, if we studied the atmosphere and we noticed the atmosphere is like Earth, we could probably just take our helmets off. It'd be cool.
Really?
Yeah, that's why we say they're Earth-like planets. we can't get to them yet. Obviously,
Where are these planets? Where are these planets?
They're in our galaxy, a very small sliver of our galaxy we've been able to study. We've found these planets.
All right, great. That still doesn't change my point that when you study how life is balanced on a razor's edge on this planet, it demands an intelligent mind. I don't care how many planets there are out there that have similar. I would argue those planets have been created that way as well then, if they're life-sustaining. I mean, if you can go onto those planets and suck wind the way you do on here and live, and have the whole life process continue on, it's incredible. Because please don't go to the moon and take your helmet off.
I won't, I promise.
Good.
But I'm just saying, like you say, that the life balanced on a razor edge. Life as we know it, our carbon-based life forms, as we know it, as humans, as tigers and bugs and all that kind of stuff, they require this type of atmosphere. That doesn't mean other life can require some kind of extreme atmosphere.
I agree.
So why are you saying life balances on a razor's edge when it could definitely be on a much wider range?
Well, the whole point is, your life and my life cannot be sustained on a planet where oxygen comprises 30% of the atmosphere. Fires would break out all over the place, we'd all burn to death. And if oxygen comprised 10% of our atmosphere, we'd all suffocate. So, I mean, it is so precise. I mean, think about Jupiter. The gravitational field of Jupiter sucks in all these comets and asteroids headed straight to smack planet Earth. It's an amazing vacuum cleaner, Jupiter is, and it protects us in an amazing way. Think about if the Earth spun more quickly on its axis. There wouldn't be life as we know it on this planet. So, I mean, the amazing balance of nature that sustains life, it demands some type of intelligent mind, doesn't it?
It sustains our life, but I mean, it doesn't require an intelligent mind. I'm just saying, what makes our life so special that it has to balance on that razor's edge?
All right. I have a brother who's a transplant surgeon. He transplants kidneys and livers down at Emory University Hospital, or over at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. I can promise you, sir, he has gone through the most stringent academic courses in order to be able to transplant livers and kidneys. And if you need a liver transplant, I would encourage you not to go to someone who lives down on the drag to have them transplant. I would encourage you instead to turn to someone who has studied the amazing, intricate order and design of the human body and who can pull off that transplant in such a way that you're going to live instead of die of kidney or liver failure. Now, people love to say to me, oh, there's not that much order and design in the human body. See, the reason that I almost feel like calling them either inconsistent or an intellectual hypocrite is because you know very, very well that if you get sick enough, you're not going down to someone on the drag for help. You're going to the most highly trained doctor you can possibly find who understands the order and design of your body and who can correct the disorder that has occurred. That's my point.
Okay, that doesn't tell me why our life is special, why it has to hang on that razor's edge. You're saying our life is complicated to understand for us. You think a worm understands how its heart beats?
What does that have to do with anything we've been talking about?
Okay, it could be very complex to us how like we have to go to school for 10 plus years to understand how to do a liver transplant. How do we know there's not something else that just looks at us like, oh hey, look, idiots trying to take out their liver again. And they can just do it as soon as they're born. And it's the same relative step from a worm to human to some other kind of life.
All right. If you have liver failure, I can promise you're not going to look at me and say it's relative. If you have liver failure and if you're on your way out of here, you know very, very well that you need a new liver in order to live.
I agree.
And you're going to have a doctor do that transplant who has studied very carefully the order and design of the human body. You're not just going to let anybody mess with your liver, I hope.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, maybe we're not as smart as we think we are.
Oh, I agree with that. We are definitely not as smart as we think we are. A bunch of us are intellectual, arrogant twits, there's no question about it. But sir, you can't deny the fact that there is amazing, intricate order and design to the human body. And you prove that you realize that when you don't go to the person on the strip to heal you, you go to a hospital. You go to the most highly trained doctor you can possibly get. Why? Because this thing is intricate. Really intricate. All right, Does intricate order and design come about by chance?
I don't think it's necessarily that complex, us. Like I'm saying, we could be the simplest, we could be very simple. Like, we only think it's complex, that's all we know. And it's the most complex thing, or one of the most complex things we've been able to study. There's still so much we don't know about the universe. Like, we only know about 5% of what the universe is made of.
Uh-huh.
The other stuff is just blind. We have no idea what it is.
Right.
We call it dark energy, dark matter. It's nothing to do with energy, man, nothing to do with matter. We should call it that, because why not?
Okay.
So the fact that we can only understand a tiny little percentage of the universe, stuff that we haven't even seen, we just think, like, hey, this is what 5% of the universe is probably made up of.
Right.
Lets me know that we may not know what we're talking about all the time.
Okay. Okay, now just listen to what you're saying. And now consider me answering your question, why do I believe God exists, by saying, we know so little of all there is to reality, God must exist. I cannot live my life that way.
I'm glad.
I cannot do what you're doing to me, which is, we know so little that we got to just say God doesn't exist, because we got to realize that science is eventually going to be able to answer all our questions. That, for me, is intellectual dishonesty. Yes, we agree. We don't know everything. We know less than 1% of all there is to know, I'm convinced. But we got to do the best job we can with the evidence we have. We've got to use not these genius minds we have, but these amazing minds to look for evidence, and then to ask ourselves, what is most reasonable, what is most plausible, not what can we prove, but what is most reasonable, what is most plausible in light of the evidence. Okay, so I think we've moved from atheism to agnosticism, right? Okay, now, here's my problem with agnosticism. It's impossible to live out. What does that mean? Tonight, you will put your head on your pillow, I'll put my head on my pillow. Like it or not, you're living for something, I'm living for something. In other words, we have motive, we have ambition, we have priorities, we have drives and desires. Okay, now all you got to do is take your motives, push them back to their origin, and you'll find out what you worship. In other words, what you consider ultimately worthy. If you consider money ultimately worthy, you will get the best education you have, very specifically to make the most money you can. If you value education as ultimately worthy, you will live for your rational mind to be the most brilliant postdoc student you can be, and professor or whatever. If you live for physical pleasure, if that's the bottom line for you, then you will be the classic hedonist, and you'll live to stimulate your nerve endings. But you see, my question is, what's the evidence that the ultimate purpose of life is to make money, to have pleasure, to be smart? Now, Jesus says the ultimate purpose in life is to love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And you can use money, and you can enjoy sex within the context of a lifelong commitment, and you are responsible to use your rational mind because it's a precious gift from God, so you better not dabble in the irrational. You better think hard and straight. And you see, that worldview makes so much more sense than the options. But the idea that you can go to sleep and say, well, I don't believe anything's worth living for, means that you will not get up tomorrow morning. Which is why Albert Camus, the great atheistic existentialist philosopher, pointed out, the only question modern man must answer is, why not commit suicide? In other words, why get up tomorrow morning if life is ultimately meaningless? But you see, obviously, you're going to create some meaning. All right, we all do, right? Or else we accept the fact that God created us for a purpose. So you see, the question then that I have for you is, what are you living for? And then secondly, what is this overwhelming evidence that convinces you that whatever it is you're living for is reliable?
Well, I would say that I don't believe there is like an ultimate meaning in the first place, so I can choose my own way to live.
Right.
And if it's relative, then there's nothing you can say that's wrong.
Correct. Which means tomorrow morning when you get up, if you figure out how to steal money from people, or if you figure out how to help hurting people, it ultimately doesn't matter, because it's whatever you choose, right? Okay, now, if you begin to think about that deeply enough, you begin to realize, whoa, this life is a crapshoot. And then you have to struggle with despair. And you see, what so concerns me is exactly what concerned Friedrich Nietzsche. But there are so many people who think that life is meaningless, but they think, let's have a great time today. They never have the intellectual courage to say, why shouldn't I commit suicide? Why should I continue living? And my point is not that you have to commit suicide. That was not Camus' point. But the point is, if that's what you believe about reality, then I want to watch you live it out.
Your claim might have evidence, but that evidence also supports other claims that counteract your own.
Okay, good. So that means we got to study more, right?
Right.
Good. You don't just throw up your hands and say, oh, it doesn't exist. No, when you have a doubt, you go study more evidence, right?
Right.
Good. So, what's the evidence that God exists? Order and design in the cosmos point to an intelligent mind. In all of my observation, this guy is dressed the way he is, not by accident. He's got a rational mind. He's dressed together in a rational way. And when I go to a restaurant and I'm about to eat a delicious meal, I don't say there's no chef. No, a delicious meal points me to an intelligent mind.
So who made God?
Nobody. God is eternal.
If God is order and creation, then that implies some sort of organization and structure. So if God is organization and structure, then doesn't that imply a conscious creator behind God?
Okay, good question. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause.
But how do we know the universe has a beginning?
Just study the Big Bang.
Before the Big Bang,
Right.
there was something. It was sort of beyond the scope of time and what we're capable of perceiving, but generally speaking, matter can't be created or destroyed. So in the same way that you're suggesting, the universe is eternal. The universe has always existed in some form and it will always exist, even if it's not in some form that we're capable of conceptualizing.
Before the Big Bang, there was nothing.
So what evidence do you have that God has always existed?
I have to ask the question, is it more reasonable to believe something comes from nothing, which is what I have to believe if I say there is no God? Because obviously we've got something here.
God just came from nothing.
No, he didn't come from anywhere. He is eternal. And when I begin to study science and realize, wait a second, the universe is not eternal, time and space are not eternal. Time has a beginning, space has a beginning. Then I have to ask myself, is it more reasonable? Not can I prove. I can't prove any of this. But I've got to ask myself, is it more reasonable to believe that something comes from nothing or that something comes from someone? Okay, so what is your better alternative to God?
I'm religious in some ways. Generally, if God existed, then I feel like there would be, I don't know, maybe some organized religions that weren't so.
Okay, good. Brilliant point.
Like, if there is, as you claim, like this reasonable assumption that God exists,
Right?
surely the number of people who can make that assumption and thus decide to follow God's teachings would be the majority. And while the majority of the world's population do believe in some sort of God, they certainly do not follow the teachings. Like, if you read texts, like
Good.
Christians, for the most part,
Yeah.
like to preach, love and acceptance,
Yep.
but don't really practice that. So if you're arguing that there is this reasonable assumption that God exists,
Yes.
then it almost creates this implication that no one gives a.
God chose to limit his power by giving me a free will, which means I can take out my wallet and give him money for lunch. I can hold back and smack him in the face. God makes me do neither, which means I am responsible for whether I feed him or smack him. It is impossible for God to create a free will in Cliffe and then program me to have to feed him. Impossible. It is impossible for God to create a square circle. Impossible. It is impossible for God to exist and not exist at the same time. See, so when we say that God is all-powerful and that God is God, we don't mean God just does anything. No. God gives us a free will, and then he says, okay, exercise that free will.
If God's power is limited because of free will, would that not imply that God is not all-powerful?
God did not make me slap him. God gave me a hand and a free will. And he gave me it for a purpose, to love and respect the gentleman. But if I choose to roll my hand into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face, and then if I have the audacity to blame God, I am a con artist.
That would imply that God cannot know what you are going to do. That God cannot know the outcome of your actions, which contradicts God being omnipotent.
And all-knowing, omniscient. Very good. You are right. It's a very difficult question. If God is all-knowing, that means that God knows whether I'm going to slap him or feed him. So how can I have free will if God knows what I'm going to do to this guy before I do it? Right. Exactly. Okay. That is the whole issue that we were flirting with earlier about God being outside of time. I think in terms of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I do not think in terms of it's all the same. I am locked into time. But God is outside of that dimension of time, which means God lives in the eternal now, which means God sees yesterday, today, and tomorrow in one glance. Which means it's not because God has programmed me to hit him that I hit him. God knows I'm going to hit him because he is outside of the dimension of time, and he sees tomorrow today. That's what the Bible means when it says God is eternal. He's not locked into time. Guess what? It doesn't make too much sense to me. You know why?
Why not?
I am locked into time. So when I talk to you about a being who is outside of the dimension of time, whoa, that's a mystery to me. I can begin to grapple with it, but I can't understand it totally, that's for sure.
The Bible is, to some extent, a primary historical source.
Okay.
Even if it was sort of a product of its time, or, rewritten and retranslated dozens and dozens of times.
Not rewritten, retranslated.
No, it was rewritten.
When was it rewritten?
Changed. Every translation of the Bible, anytime you translate something, you have to make decisions about what, because things don't always translate one-to-one, so you have to make decisions about what meanings you're going to carry over.
Okay.
The first one that comes to mind is one that Christians like to use a lot, which is, I don't remember the exact verse, but man shall not lie with another man, something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
The sort of translation that's used is not exactly correlating to the original Hebrew meaning. I might be mangling that a little bit.
All right, no problem.
But so you do get changes over time. It's not necessarily a perfect replica of what it used to be, but yeah.
Okay. From the 2nd through the 10th century AD, before the printing press, all handwritten, so 5,800. Then you've got 10,000 Latin manuscripts, the Latin Vulgate. Then you've got 9,300 approximately manuscripts in Syriac, Slavic, Gothic, Ethiopic, Coptic, and Armenian. So you've got 25,000 early manuscripts of the New Testament, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. Then you have quotes of the New Testament, 38,289 approximately, church fathers quoting the New Testament, which means there are only 11 verses that are not quoted by the early church fathers in the 2nd through the 4th century. Friends, we have an incredibly high degree of certainty that we really have what the eyewitnesses wrote.
I'm not really entirely sure Point only.
That you can trust the New Testament to give you accurate historical information. It's historically reliable. And you acknowledge that when you said about, I think he was an historical person. Okay, great. But now, in that historical record, you read about his miracles, you read about the way he loved people and what he taught, you read about how he died, and then how he rose from the dead.
There are like dozens of other historical accounts that, while they might be reliable and backed up by other sources, are not necessarily perfect retelling of events. Because, you said it yourself, we can't always trust our eyes, we can't always trust exactly what we're seeing.
Good.
So even if I see an event directly and I report exactly what I think happened, it's not necessarily a faithful or reliable accounting of events.
Okay, I agree. I can never be 100% sure, neither can you.
Oh,
But that doesn't mean I can't know. I know my wife. I know his brothers. I know that Marcy is standing in front of me right now. Can I 100% prove that? No. But there's enough evidence that I can start talking with Marcy and I can express to him respect for the way he's challenged me in a great way about these points.
But you're making a leap there, which is seeing a person standing in front of you is the same thing as having some sort of spiritual experience that confirms to you the existence of God.
Oh, I'm sorry that I've miscommunicated. I can't audibly hear God. All right, that's not an option for me. Okay? But it is an option to explore the evidence with my rational mind. It is an option for me emotionally to read about his love for me and respond emotionally. And it is spiritually an option for me to spiritually connect with God, because I'm convinced he's created us with a God-shaped vacuum. And what I appeal to is anthropology that shows us that around the world, every culture has some type of religion. So we as human beings have this innate drive to know God.
You have to compare that to things you as a human being are familiar with as possible.
Yes.
And sometimes
Absolutely.
you hear about something happening and you're like, that can't be true. And then you're given an explanation. You're given a reasoning for how this thing that you previously thought was impossible could be true.
Yeah.
And it's up to you whether or not you believe that explanation.
Yes.
But with things like scientific principles or historical events, those explanations make logical sense. You can study them and you can analyze them and you can pick them apart, and they fit, they work. And scientific principles are constantly updated and changing, which is why they're theories, not rules. So there is some uncertainty, but when making this assumption that God exists, so if you say Jesus Christ was able to turn water into wine, and your only mechanism for how that was possible is, well, he had spiritual powers. He was God's son. He was able to do it because God willed it to be so. There's no logic there that you can unpack. There's no step-to-step reason. There's no substance to it. You're making assumptions.
You're not making assumptions. You're starting with the evidence is God exists, who put the laws of nature together.
But you're conflating evidence with assumption.
No.
If I make...
No, I'm not.
Say...
That's wrong.
Gravity exists.
Come on now, Marcy, listen better.
That is something you can observe and record.
And that's a wonderful, narrow branch of knowledge. You can't do that with George Washington. You can't do that with Muhammad or Jesus or Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. Okay? So, Marcy, come on, let's be open-minded now. And let's acknowledge that, yes, gravity exists. Boom. It falls. Gravity exists. That's correct. But guess what? Your love for this person is shown by your caring for this person. And guess what? I'm convinced, Marcy, that your caring for this person is even more important than the law of gravity when it comes to your life. I am convinced that there is far more fulfillment, joy, and meaning that comes from your life from loving this person than from the law of gravity. So don't get mixed up with categories. What does the color green smell like? It doesn't, Marcy. Why? Because colors don't have smell. It's a different category. Smell and color. What does middle C look like? Middle C doesn't look like anything, Marcy. Middle C is a note in the scale that you hear.
I think you're purposely misinterpreting my.
No, I'm not. I'm taking your thinking seriously, and I'm jamming on the thinking. Not you, but your thinking.
What is your personal stance on like Christians or like God loving like LGBT people?
Jesus Christ loves every gay, lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual, rapist, every fornicator, every adulterer and adulteress. God loves all of us so much that he sent his son Christ to bleed and die on a cross to forgive us.
That's real smooth, grouping in gay people with the rapists.
And the adulterers and the fornicators and the guys who lust like me. We're all the same, guys. We're all the same. I've got feet of clay just the same way you both do. I'm a sinner the same way you both are. I'm also valuable the same way you guys are, because we're all created in the image of God. And guess what? Favoritism is a sin, and judgmentalism is a sin. So I'm not here to judge you, but I am here to think with you and to answer your hard issues that you raise. And I respect you and appreciate you for raising those issues so thoughtfully. Stuart, what do you say?
Practically speaking, there are so many subgroups who, in such a militant way, do not like each other, even on this campus. We see it politically, right? And religiously. Well, a large part of the reason why they don't like each other is because they don't view each other as we're all created in the image of God. We all have value. They just look at their beliefs and worldview, and they don't see the person, and they just say, I'm going to attack your worldview, and I don't even like you as a person. I'm going to exclude you. So that's the first point. The second point is, because moral objectivity is turning into moral relativism in our country, so you have your truth, I have my truth, don't step on my truth, I'm not going to step on your truth. Look, that's all inclusive and beautiful sounding, but the problem is the flowery side of that gets tremendously ambiguous in the sense of we're all talking over each other because we really have no moral objectivity in understanding what is really right or wrong. We just speak over each other and yell at each other without any agreement of what is really right or wrong at the base level, then you can never really have a discussion.
People have innate sense of what feels good and what feels wrong.
Or you should, Stuart, not do that, not kick that kitten over there. Don't say that because it's my truth and my desire in terms of what is ethically right or wrong, right? Because you said feels. You didn't say moral obligation, you should not do that. You said it just feels like I shouldn't do that. So your feelings are not part of the facts of reality in terms of that is really objectively wrong for you to go kick that kitten.
To answer your question, what evidence do we have that people without religion have morals and people with religion automatically have? Let's look at the statistics of
That's not my point at all.
Sorry, I didn't finish. Let's look at the statistics of the abuse that comes out of the church.
Yes.
Of the people, of the children who are molested by the Catholic Church and by the Baptist Church and the cover-up.
Totally agree.
Where is the correlation to morals within an establishment that perpetuates and covers up so much abuse?
Absolutely.
That
that would be what Jesus attacked the most throughout his entire life, which is religious hypocrisy, in terms of the nastiness of religion and what it can do. Just like atheism, Mao Zedong, so many other atheist militant leaders killed over 100 million people because it was a godless society saying that there's no moral obligation of what is right or wrong. So that's why, hold on one second, that's why you have the USSR militia military veterans saying, I thank God that there is no God, so I can desire and mete out exactly what I want to do to this inmate who I have in terms of how I treat them. Because there is no God, there is no transcendent moral obligation or sense. See, she's acting, her argument there was purely out of emotionalism. And I agree in the sense of there's pain, there's cover-up, there's abuse, totally agree. And absolutely that is wrong. But how in the world does that in some kind of way defeat what comes out of the Christian faith and Judeo-Christian values based off of the founder, Jesus Christ? Just because of hypocritical people? That in no way somehow sullies who Jesus is, his teaching, and Christianity.
Then would you not expect to see some physical correlation? Would you not expect to see some sort of statistical representation of that?
The statistical comparison of something like Christianity to other religions is staggering. If you go right back to the ancient Roman Empire, who are the ones who during the plagues were saving those who were exactly the opposite in ethnicity and religion from these plagues and giving up their lives by doing so? All the statistics show. Look at somebody like Rodney Stark, the sociologist, who's an atheist. Christians were going in and taking them out to the suburbs to save their lives while getting the disease themselves and dying. Or look at India today. So much of the AIDS crisis, even in Africa, for example, all of that is being done away with via Christian hospitals. Okay, so statistically, we can look at these things, and then on top of that, you have to start to define what a Christian is. She just blindly said, the Catholic Church. Okay, are you just going to say a mainline denomination all of a sudden? They are all Christians, and look what they're doing. Well, you have to define what a Christian is.
So you're sort of dodging around my question, which is, would you not expect there to be some studyable, some observable impact? Would you not be able to see, like, for example, Utah, an extremely high population of religious people.
Mormons.
People who, though you might not agree with their exact interpretation, believe in Jesus Christ and believe in God, and to an extent follow their principles. So then why, for example, if it is this religious state, why don't they have better medical outcomes? Why don't more people get better faster in their hospitals? Why don't people get healed faster? If there is this like observable power of God, then where's the backing? Where's the evidence? You also like to make these claims about atheists, but what about the Crusades? What about the countless examples of the Christian Church, the Catholic Church, discriminating against non-Catholics? How do you explain that?
You just did explain that. Okay, so I'm going to take your first point then, and then we'll take your second. First point is, there was the case in Pennsylvania, who a young girl got pneumonia. Parents did not take her to a hospital. She ended up dying. Okay, what do you have to do as a Christian there? Just say, oh, we all disagree, let's just throw up our hands. Everybody has a different interpretation on Christianity. No, you go to the context. You go and look inside the Greek, the Hebrew, and figure out what in the world is this saying. Secondly, 40 million people alone across India and Southeast Asia have said that they've dealt with near-death experiences, that they've had them. 400 million across same region, as well as Europe, have claimed to have seen and encountered the miraculous. These are Christians. So if you want data and studies, that's it right there. And if you want somehow, what has Christianity done for the world, gladly look into human rights, gladly look into the 300s AD in terms of when hospitals are started, gladly look into what happened with William Wilberforce. Later on, Martin Luther King Jr. See how their faith in Christ propelled them to seek after justice. And there's a base reason to seek after justice with a suffering, sacrificial slave who was Jesus Christ, as opposed to, if you're an atheist, I don't know if you are, simply an unguided, blind force that says the strong eat the weak. How does that make sense to seek after something like justice and human rights and sacrificing for the other?
So who defines right and wrong if there is no God? We human beings. I'm not more right than he is. He's not more right than you are. And you're definitely not more right than she is. It's all relative.
The Crusades.
Yeah. Okay. Guys, that's the Crusades are so simple, it's embarrassing. Why is hypocrisy wrong? You seem pretty ticked about it. Good, I'm glad you are. But why is hypocrisy wrong? Why is me lying to him wrong? Why is me stealing from him wrong? I mean, if I find Bill Gates' wallet, what's wrong with me emptying Bill Gates' wallet of the money?
Absolutely nothing.
All right, we disagree.
F***ing rich.
All right, good, bravo. Oh, and so if my morality is to steal his backpack, who are you to tell me that that's wrong? If I got guys with guns behind me, which means I got more power than he does, then why shouldn't I steal his backpack? What's wrong with it? If might makes right, if power makes right, why shouldn't I rip him off? Why?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Then what does
I
make right?
personally do not think it does.
Oh, okay. So I personally want to rip you off, okay? So just chill out, and I'm going to rip you off, because I personally want to rip you off. Come on, man, think.
I'm not saying that you can't. I'm not saying that I can stop you from doing things, but I am saying that I can react to your actions how I see fit.
Okay, good.
If I saw you go up to someone on the street and start taking their I'd probably say something.
Good. And then because I disagree with you imposing your morality on somebody else, I tell you to back off. And if you don't back off, I'll get the guys with the guns and we'll make sure you back off. And it's all a crapshoot, guys. It's all a cosmic crapshoot. All right. Now let's go back to a biblical perspective. She is created in the image of God. So like it or not, she has intrinsic innate value, which means if I don't respect her property, it is being disrespectful to her. Which means if I steal from her, that is evil. But if I'm generous to her and help her, that is good. Now, why on earth would it be good to be generous if self-preservation is what this life is all about? You're an idiot to be generous if you've just evolved. Because if you've just evolved, you know, survival of the
fittest.
Thank you. Which means if I'm fitter than you, stronger than you, what's wrong with me ripping you off? Nothing. And Jesus Christ contradicts that. And Jesus Christ says, she's a precious woman created in my image. You respect her and you respect her property and do not rip her off. That is evil. Now, what is sin? Sin is saying, I don't really respect you, so I'm going to rip you off. And God, get out. And what is hell? Hell is simply God saying, Cliff, go ahead. You've been running away from me all life long. You've been ignoring me. You've been disobeying me. Keep running. And that will be hell, running away from God. Christ bled and died on a cross to wake me up that God really does love me and wants me to have eternal life and to live right. And that is why faith in Christ is so wise.
So I grew up Catholic and I'm leaning towards Christian faith, but going to Catholic church, you always see the crucifix, and I've been told it's wrong to make Jesus an image. But I see a lot of images of Jesus, and I've been told it's wrong, and I've been told it's right. So I'm just confused, and I want to know your perspective on that.
What's the number one most recognized symbol worldwide? Now, if it was an electric chair hanging around somebody's neck, would it hold the same worth and value? No, I don't believe so, unless that person didn't just die for you, but died for the entire world, sins of the whole world. And so I think it's interesting where if it's a remembrance of what Jesus did for us, and that ultimately he defeated sin and will defeat death at the end of time, then I'm all about it. If it just becomes a ritualistic thing like I see MLB players do in the outfield right before the first pitch, where it's kissing the cross and that sort of thing, that's not sinful, but it sort of empties the cross of its power in some ways. Remember, we get the word groan from those who were carrying their crosses in the streets, who the Romans were making them carry those crosses to their destinations of when they would hang on those very crosses. And it was known, you could hear throughout the entire city, men, women groaning on crosses. I mean, it was loud, louder than you can imagine. Thank you, Dad. Louder than you can imagine in terms of the pain of it all. So I would just say the cross is obviously the central piece of our entire Christian faith. Take it very seriously. And don't take it ritualistically or somehow it's like it's just a good luck charm. But also look to it as, yes, it's death and pain. Jesus was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief and pain, and yet he points to the greatest eternity imaginable where every single tear will be wiped away from every eye.
So I joined the military a couple years ago as an infantryman.
Thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. And so I kind of asked how, so our main objective is to close in and destroy Yemen. And I was kind of wondering how that contradicts Christianity and just the rules of God.
Followers of Christ disagree. Some followers of Christ are pacifists. An excellent example of that is one of the most conservative groups of Christians in America, the Amish. The Amish are total pacifists. No police officer is going to carry a gun in this community, and we do not support military. Why? Because we take the teaching of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. And we apply it to civil morality, no violence, force of any kind. Other followers of Christ, myself included, emphasize the fact that we are all sinful human beings. And in Romans chapter 13, the Apostle Paul writes that the government does not bear the sword in vain. I would argue that if you and I go into a restaurant here in San Marcos, and while we're in there, a guy takes out a gun and starts blowing people away. If you hit the guy high and I hit him low and we break his neck in the process, that's not murder. That's killing motivated to protect the innocent from being slaughtered. And I would argue that that is an ethical decision. But remember, both sides are based on a couple of points. First point, all human life is valuable, because God created us in his image. And so every single human being has innate value. But let's also be honest, if there is no God, there's no basis for human value. If there is no God, I'm valuable because my culture tells me I'm valuable. I'm valuable because I tell myself I'm valuable. And if I'm not doing a very good job convincing myself that I'm valuable, then I feel like a piece of dirt. And if I happen to live in a culture that says, well, Cliff, your skin color is the wrong color, and you're not very smart, your GPA is not high enough, so too bad, you're a loser, well, then that's what I am, a loser. And according to Jesus Christ, there's no human being who's a loser. According to Christ, we all have equal value and dignity, because our value and dignity has nothing to do with what culture says, has nothing to do with what we say. It has everything to do with what God says. And he says, I made you in my image to reflect my character. That's what it means. To be created in the image or likeness of God means I was created to reflect the goodness, the love, the justice, the kindness of Almighty God.
So when I was in basic training, it's kind of it just felt absent. So everybody's kind of saying that it's unforgivable. So they just refuse to believe in a religion or Christianity or anything like that.
Okay, now you see, what Christ calls you to do is think through the issues carefully. Why are you concerned that murder might be wrong? I would argue you're concerned that murder or killing someone as a military figure is wrong because it's the ending of a human life. Okay, but then the obvious next question is, well, why is human life valuable? You see, sir, if there is no God, human life is a crapshoot. Human life is ultimately insignificant, except in the way that I give it significance. Well, that's great. But what happens if I'm a white racist? What happens if I'm an intellectual snob? And I say, you know, I'm more intelligent than you are, so I'm more valuable or significant than you are. And if there is no God, my opinion is just as valuable and accurate as your opinion. And your opinion is just as accurate and valuable as my opinion. And if we contradict each other, we got to realize it's all relative. So it really doesn't matter what we say and what we believe. In fact, to have a conversation where we disagree is really a waste of time, because everything, baby, is relative. No, you know better than that. You know that the issue of taking a human life involves some pretty intense, deep issues, significant issues. So you got to learn to think it through carefully, praying to God for wisdom. How do I make a decision on this? That issue for me is not that big, but I'll tell you the one that is big. What's the biggest killer of human life today? Starvation. Do you know that we have the solution for starvation? It's called money. It's called buying food. It's called getting that food to starving kids so you can put food in their mouth. Do you know what it's like for me? If I go up to this guy who's got a starving kid and I say, I'm a follower of Christ, and he says, oh, well, that's wonderful, Cliff. My kid is starving. And I say, we all have a good day, will you? Yeah, we know what that is. Stinking hypocrisy. I'm a hypocrite. If he's got a starving kid, I better get off my backside. I better make as much money as I can, and I better go out and buy food and feed his starving kid. So the obviously difficult ethical question is, how much money do I keep for myself, and how much do I give away to feed starving children? And when you put your faith in Christ, you got to start thinking through that stuff. You got to start thinking, okay, I'm here at Texas State. I'm getting a good education. I'm going to have some great career potential. I'm going to be able to make some bucks. Now, when I make those bucks, how much am I going to keep for myself, and how much am I going to give away to feed starving people in the name of Christ? So that's similar to your question you're asking, and it's the issue of human value, human dignity. And if you take God out of that picture, you're up a creek without a paddle when it comes to explaining to me why are human beings valuable. Stuart, what do you think?
Was the Roman centurion told by the Apostle Paul when he was saved, if you remember, the earthquake happened, this Roman centurion, tough blue-collar guy, he said, I need a miracle if I'm ever going to believe. Well, he got a miracle. A lot of people did not get a miracle in the Bible, and they never believed. Some did believe. He got a miracle. Did Paul then say, all right, now that you're saved, stop being a Roman centurion. Get out of the naval force. Do not be a police officer. No, Paul never said that. He upheld the military. The government did not wield the sword in vain. Paul said that when Nero was in power, by the way, who was lighting his gardens with the bodies of Christians. So tremendous respect for authority, and yet also challenging the authority at the same time. Was God sinning by saying that the Israelites should use just war at certain times in the Old Testament? Was God sinning by saying that? Going back against his own commandment to be pacifists? No, he was not sinning. God is perfect. Okay, so we see that there's obviously a place for it. Now, the temptation is to become the good old boys, the tough guys, and let's just go ahead and, again, dehumanize those who are in the Middle East, those who are in whatever part of the world. I met a very gifted sniper once in South Carolina. This guy could not get off alcohol and drugs, even when we were together, because he had so much guilt over sniping family members who were outside of the terrorist that they were targeting. All right, so what had he started to do with his buddies? Dehumanize the group that they were after. So a Christian is never to dehumanize. A Christian is to understand all are created in God's image. Some people, all of us to an extent, some people more so than others, are horribly defaced because of the devil, because of flesh, because of our government even, different forces. But we're always to treat other people as though they are created in the image of God, because they truly are.
What's the hardest issue that it makes it so difficult?
I would say maybe just the unforgivable action of taking another life in combat. It just, well, not just a single life. So let's say we have to maybe call field artillery and they strike a building and it just happen to be casualty. It feels like that's just an internal conflict that might be unforgivable.
Okay, but why are you in the armed forces then? If that's the big issue for you, why are you serving in the armed forces?
So I served in the armed forces, one, because I feel like that was the main call of my life. Like that's the only thing I've had a desire to do. And then it was also the not only that, but it's more of a family tradition to join the armed forces.
Okay. So I hope that you will question your family traditions the same way I had to. I grew up in a home where Jesus Christ was worshipped by mom and dad, but I couldn't believe in Jesus just because mom and dad did, right? Jesus is not the truth because mom and dad tell me he's the truth. Jesus is not the truth because a church tells me he's the truth. Something is true regardless of who believes in it or who disbelieves in it, because truth is reality. A big battleship was going through the night and it was foggy out. And all of a sudden they saw a signal down the water a bit, and the signal said, alter your course 10 degrees north. And the captain said, no. Tell them to alter their course 10 degrees south. And the signal came back, alter your course 10 degrees north. And the guy said, no, wait a second. Send back the message, alter your course 10 degrees south. I'm a battleship, knowing the fear that would strike into the oncoming boat's captain's heart. And to the shock and amazement of the admiral of that ship, that naval ship, the message came back, alter your course 10 degrees south. I am a lighthouse. See, truth exists separate from what I believe. And if I'm headed towards a rock, a lighthouse, I better alter my course and get in touch with reality. So Jesus Christ made this incredible claim, I am the truth. Regardless of what mom and dad believe, regardless of what the church says, regardless of what your culture says, I am the truth. Now, he's either blowing smoke, he's either a liar, or else he's speaking the truth. And if he's speaking the truth, you and I want to be in touch with reality. And that's why putting your faith in him, if the evidence is he's reliable, is such a wise decision. And you see, I think the evidence of the way Jesus treated people, the evidence of his ethical teaching, the evidence of the way he died, loving and forgiving his enemies who were nailing him to a cross, and the evidence of the way he rose from the dead points to him being trustworthy. That's why for you to put your faith in Christ is not a leap into la-la land, fantasy land, or cultural bias, or family bias. No, you're putting your faith in the real Jesus Christ, who is reliable and credible.
Like if I could put my faith in Christ and still have that occupation.
Well, I sure hope so.
That was my real concern.
Oh, you bet. Officers Christian Fellowship is one of the finest Christian fellowships in the United States, and it's all in the Navy and Army and Marines. Officers Christian, yeah, you can be a follower of Christ and serve in the armed forces, absolutely. Because God has instituted government to maintain justice and order in society. That's the primary first reason for government, to protect the innocent from being ripped off and slaughtered. So yes, you can be a follower of Christ, a genuine follower of Christ, and serve in the military, and you'll begin to discover that there are a whole slew of folks in the United States Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, who are deeply committed to Christ.
I grew up Jewish. I didn't find love within that community, and so I kind of just been on my own, researching on my own. So I would consider myself more of like a mystic than anything else. Mm-hmm. I believe God's name forever is I am. And I think that Jesus is buried within me. And I think that David is the son of God, and David represents humanity and the stench of humanity.
The typical student your age buys into something called moral therapeutic deism, which is moral, you set your own morality. What's true for you is true for you. What's true for me is true for me. Moral, therapeutic, God is my therapist. And so God is always there for me when I feel bad. And then deism, which is God is kind of aloof, he's kind of out there. So I think what we're trying to communicate is the typical person your age and below will say in the US, they'll say, that's kind of my definition of God. That's how God has revealed himself to me. And that's not like a selfish thing, but it's more so I want to define God as how I want to define him. And that has primarily been a pushback against church abuse. So I've been hurt in the church, so I want to be spiritual but not religious. And spiritual but not religious basically just means I don't like what's going on with the authority structure in the church. Too many people have misused God in general, and so now let's just go ahead and redefine God in our own terms.
Yeah, so it might be a little bit different. I think there is one core that, like, when you experience it the correct way, you experience it that way, but I think that...
But what's the correct way if it's all our own personal experience? There's no correct way.
You got me.
It wasn't a gotcha moment.
I don't know. I think that I'm very close to God, and I think I experience God, and to me, it's like, yeah, God won't shut up in my life. Like, it's
that's
all
awesome.
around
Yeah.
me. Yeah. So I don't really know. I think it's something you feel, and and maybe that goes back to your point where you say it's so individualized, and maybe that's not the best way. But
did Jesus reveal himself in name as a human being? Did God punch a hole through space and time to reveal himself as a person? It's kind of like Shakespeare and Hamlet. did Shakespeare write himself into the play as Hamlet? And you can get to know Hamlet. Hamlet's a real person that Shakespeare is trying to reveal to us. Well, is that who Jesus is and was? And if not, if he just said, I'm a floating spirit or I'm a mushroom, many people believe Jesus was just a mushroom. Joe Rogan believed that for the longest time. So maybe he was. Or are the Gospels reliable historically? And were the Gospels, like so many of the great literary critics like C.S. Lewis talked about, they are written as nonfiction. If they were written as fiction, you could just say, well, it's written as fiction, make up Jesus, decide whoever Jesus is on your own terms, and it's your own experience. But I think the Gospels as historical documents and Jesus as a historical figure, who 98.9% of scholars believe across our nation was a historical figure, well, if he revealed himself in a certain way and said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, I think the experience, like you said, is beautiful and very important, but now we have to contend with, well, is that true? Is he really who he said he was as the only way?
There's a lot of symbolism in the Bible, and it goes a lot deeper. Like, for example, you say he was nailed to the cross, right? I believe that, but I also believe maybe there is like a ecstasy around it, like Jesus was being nailed to us, opposed to just being nailed to the cross. That's why Jesus is within us.
Okay, so you believe, though, that there are different genres in the Bible. Apocalyptic literature, historical narrative, poetry, song.
A love story, for sure.
You're going to interpret based off of genre. You're not going to go look at apocalyptic literature and say, oh, this is historical narrative. So when the book of Revelation, for example, talks about this three-headed monster, well, you're not going to look at that and say, oh, there's a three-headed monster running around rampant the Roman Empire. No, there's more metaphor, there's more apocalyptic genre. But then you have Jesus being nailed to a cross. I mean, any historian worth his salt would say, yes, that actually happened. And that's one of the biggest defeaters against my Muslim friends. My Muslim friends would say, no, Jesus did not die on a cross. Well, they're going to have to contend with the history and evidence behind he did die on a cross. So I don't know, that would be my pushback there. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because if I'm just going to say, oh, it's all a metaphor, well, I better treat all of my textbooks that way then. Science, as well as history here at this fine university. But I don't think you would do that, right? Or because you would fail in just about every class if you did.
I will say, I agree that it is historical, even though that's so contradicting. I want to believe,
How is it contradicting?
Because I'm over here saying that it's metaphors and it's symbolism, but I'm also like, it could be historical, so I am contradicting myself, but.
Well, I love that you take Jesus seriously. And the beauty about Christianity is you can get to know a person who claims to be God, who is, we believe is God, actually wanting a personal relationship with us. If you go to Hinduism, for example, there's going to be no personal relationship. There's definitely going to be no grace and forgiveness. And there's definitely not going to be an understanding of sin. There's always just going to be karma, and you messed up, and sorry, if you're dying of cancer right now, it was something you did in your previous life. But I think what Jesus says when it comes to grace and justice, yes, we mess up often, and oftentimes consequences follow, but there's also grace. And so for me, I would just say you're going to have to throw out the Bible if you're going to say we can conceptualize Jesus any old way we want to.
You've always heard that, like, you know, God's creation, we are God's creation, and all of that. Well, if we are God's creation, why would God create you in a way where then he can turn back to you and say, well, you're sinning. Why are you doing this to me?
Great question. You and I are not robots. We're human beings and created in the image of God, which partially means we have a free will, which means I can pull out my wallet if this guy's hungry. Aren't you so glad you sat here today? Oh, yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah. And I can give him my wallet and tell him go out and get dinner. Or I can take my hand that God has given me, and instead of pulling out money to give it to him, I can roll it into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face. God makes me do neither, but he will judge me if I choose to roll my hand into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face, because that is a perversion of the gift of a hand that God gave me. in stark contrast to pulling out of my wallet to give him money because he's hungry. That is good. Smacking him is evil. So God chose to partially limit his power by giving me a free will, which means if I choose to haul back and slam him in the face, he's not going to put plexiglass right here, and my hand is going to reverberate and recoil after I hit the plexiglass. But there's coming a day of judgment when God will hold me responsible for the way I exercise my free will.
It does make sense, because I've heard people tell me, oh, well, we're not, under the total influence of God, and we still have freedom per se. But I just always wondered, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, did he give us that freedom knowing we would sin? And basically, that's basically my question. Or did he expect us to just be completely sinless?
No, he gives us a free will, calls us to be responsible. I've been irresponsible. That is my sin. My sin is, I think I got a better way to be happy. I think I got a better way to live my life than God's way. In other words, God, in spite of the fact that you're all-knowing and all-loving, I got a better way. I think I know what's best for Cliff. And God says, whoa, slow down, Cliff. I'm all-knowing and I'm all-loving. You can trust me. And now I got to make a decision. Am I going to trust God? Or am I going to trust Cliff ultimately to define right and wrong, to define the purpose of my sexuality, to define the purpose of my money? Every area of life. Does God know better than I do, or do I know better than God? In many ways, it just comes down to that simple statement. Do I know better than God, or does God know better than me the best way to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be satisfied in life? And I think, especially when I'm in university, around the tender ages of 18 to 23, that having sex with anybody who wants to have sex with me, consensual sex, is by far the best way to be happy. And Jesus Christ says, no, Cliff, you're wrong. Because when you have sex outside of the context of a lifelong commitment, you're trivializing yourself and you're trivializing your sex partner. And guess what, Cliff? A woman is not just a good-looking pair of legs. A woman is not a 10 or an 8 or a 6 or a 2. No, that is a totally false view of womanhood. A woman is a precious human being created in the image of God, which means you better learn to respect her, Cliff, as a woman, not as a hunk of meat on a hoof.
Another thing I've been thinking about is in that process, how do you prevent yourself from, falling into a trap of the Bible or the Word of God being weaponized against society? Because we saw it in your early European history with the mandate of heaven, and even with the United States with manifest destiny.
Yep.
They had a mandate from heaven to do this. When in reality, how does that make sense?
Sir, the answer to your question is so simple, but it's very disturbing. I can't answer your question. You got to go do your homework. You got to read the Bible for yourselves, because you are absolutely correct. People are going to use the Bible to weaponize their opinion and to slam you into the ground. And that's tragic. That is evil, it's wrong, but you're right, sir. It's been done for thousands of years. Don't buy into it. Instead, read the Bible for yourself. Ask God to give you wisdom. Apply the scriptures to your life, and don't use it as a weapon, because that has been done, and it's sick and tragic. But remember, nuclear energy has been used to blow Hiroshima and Nagasaki off the map. It doesn't mean that nuclear energy is all bad, just because it's abused. And there's a lot of stuff that's been abused. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Drugs. There's some bad drugs. You can get hooked and become an addict. Or there's some use of good drugs, where a doctor will medicate you and you will be a lot healthier as a result of drugs. So don't get turned off by religious hypocrisy. Reject it. Reject it when people weaponize their faith and use it to justify slamming people in the ground. That's evil, flat out. And Christ attacked those people in the Gospels. You're a delight to talk to. I like the way you think.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Wait, just 1 second. Stuart, what do you have to say to this gentleman?
I buttered my bread yesterday, stuck it in the toaster, I could have used that butter knife to have stuck it in my dad, or he could have stuck it in me. Depends where we're at in our relationship. No, but you get my point. I mean, a butter knife is meant to butter bread, and if it's not, then it's being abused for its purpose, as well as Beethoven, very gifted, and if you play Beethoven poorly, doesn't make Beethoven somehow a horrible artist. Just like Jesus Christ. And what I find so interesting is Jesus came with the towel more than any other spiritual leader, not even close. Jesus came with self-sacrifice, not self-assertion. In our culture today, it's about your life for mine. Jesus says it's my life for yours. And that has shaped Judeo-Christian values down through our nation's history. The scary part is that's kind of being taken away. The revival that I see with your guys' generation, fortunately, is bringing it back. But if you remove Judeo-Christian values based off of the spiritual leader who brought the towel, now all of a sudden you're going to see forgiveness disappear. We talked about sin. You're going to see sin disappear. You're going to see commitment. See, to your sexual question earlier, the thing I see in my town that's concerning to me is open marriages and key parties. I've been invited before. I said no. And I think that's very important for people to say no. Because some people think it's just spicing up the marriage. No, it's communicating to your children that you could care less about your spouse and commitment. But Jesus Christ came, unlike any other spiritual leader, and said there's something called a covenant that you strike with a spouse where you say, till death do us part. And this is before God. And so you lose the moral bearings of our society when the church loses its moral authority done right through Jesus' teachings and who he was. The church done right was in the Roman Empire, when all the big plagues hit in the 300s and 400s AD, the Christians were the only ones who were leaving the suburban areas, going down into the urban areas, giving up their own lives because they caught the plague themselves, trying to bring others out of the cities to the suburbs to save their lives. Okay, that's what Christ taught, all about sacrifice. So whenever you see any type of abuse in the name of Christ, you just got to call it what it is. But if there wasn't this Jesus Christ who existed, who all of a sudden made it cool to be kind and self-sacrificial, I don't know where we'd be as a society or as a world.